Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So, today I want to talk about this GTX 780 Ti Matrix Platinum. Because yes, I got another one. And this one was also in a dead state, and it is now repaired. As you can see, this one does not have an e-power hanging off of it, despite having had the exact same problem as the e-powered 780 Ti Matrix Platinum, which is this one over here. So, yeah, since I never showed the original state of the other card before it had an e-power on it, I think I'm going to use the opportunity with this card to kind of show you what the problem is with these cards, because it is a rather common issue. I've had a 290X DirectCO2 with the exact same issue. Buildzoid had a 290X Matrix with the exact same issue. There's also the GTX 1080 FTW and possibly also the 1070 Ti, if they share the PCB from EVGA, that have a very similar issue also appearing on them. And that is that some capacitors, on this card they are 12 volt input filtering capacitors at the VRM, just die, short circuit, melt or whatever. And if your power supply doesn't detect that there is a short circuit and doesn't turn off properly or like fast enough, you will have a rather bad case of burnt and charred PCB. So there's the heatsink off, and let's also get rid of the VRM heatsink, and then I can show you what we had happen on this card. Now I can say right away that this card does not have an e-power because this one did not have as bad of a short circuit, because the short circuit on this card did not burn itself into the PCB. The only thing that got burned are these said capacitors. So there's 6 missing capacitors on the front. There's another 3 on the back, but I don't want to take the back plate off. Just, it looks the exact same. I pulled them off. And yeah, so that seems to be the issue with the card, is that these capacitors, I assume that these capacitors are just faulty. And I think that, yeah, so basically I think that these capacitors are faulty components because it happens a lot, exclusively on Asus cards and then later that EVGA one. And it happens on cards that are made up of completely different VRM components too. So for example, the 780 Ti and 290X Matrix, they do share this same vCore VRM. Which is a 12-phase using CSD 87350 dual end FETs. And then in this case, like they both have IR3598 doublers, and then the NVIDIA ones are running off of a CJ 8318, and then the AMD one is like a IR3567B or something like that. Very similar VRM. But the 290X DirectCO2 I had, which had the exact same problem, well, it also ran off of that IR3567B controller, but it did not have dual end FETs. It actually ran off of a 6-phase using IR3555 smart power stages. So completely different power switching components and still the same issue. So I suspect that the capacitors are actually the root cause of this. I think that they're just a batch of faulty components, and they seem to have a tendency to go short circuit. And maybe heat is also a component of that, because assuming that the EVGA card that came around later, that also had these meltdown problems, is the same problem, like assuming that card also died because of faulty capacitors, EVGA did issue a like repair kit or something like that, that just added a whole bunch of thermal pads to the VRM. And while it didn't stop the issue from appearing, as far as I know, it did reduce the likelihood of a short circuit in the VRM occurring. And given that this VRM runs pretty hot, like, yeah, I touched this while it was running, it does get pretty hot. It is a 12-phase, but it does still get pretty hot because 780 Ti's, well, are 780 Ti's. And actually, each one of these is only rated for 40 amps. That's not a whole lot. And also they're dual end FETs, so these are not as efficient as like power stages or the Armoses. But yeah, so basically these capacitors tend to go short circuit, And this is the first card that I had where the short circuit actually stopped inside the capacitors. Actually, this one straight up didn't have a short circuit. So even when it still had the charred and burned capacitors on the PCB, it never showed up as an actual short circuit. So the capacitors might have actually all burned through completely, so that the short circuit basically burnt itself away. However, I wasn't going to risk powering the card on with burnt components on the PCB, so I removed them anyway. And after checking a board view and reconfirming with my multimeter, I did figure out that these capacitors are actually just 12-volt input filtering, and well, there's all of this. That's also 12-volt input filtering. So while these are not multi-layer ceramics, these are a lot of high capacity 16-volt, like 12-volt power line input filtering capacitors. I really don't think that these are that needed. Like, these are very redundant because like the card works, it even overclocks pretty well. So I did decide not to put these back on. If this was a proper repair, if I was repairing this for someone else and not myself, I would put these back because that's just what you should do. But since this is a card for my own use, I am fine with these being missing. It's really not that big of a deal. It's just 12-volt input filtering. So yeah, card works, and this one got really lucky because the capacitors did not, like, the capacitors burned themselves out and didn't damage the PCB, because if what you usually get is this. So this is where the capacitor also went short circuit on the back, and instead of just burning out the capacitor, it got so hot that it also burned the PCB. And on the front, this looked even worse, because when you burn the PCB, when things get hot enough, you also have a potential to also destroy the power switching component in your phase. That did happen on the other 790 Ti and the 290X I had. The phase where the biggest short circuit occurred also had the dual end FET or a power stage die in it. And in case of the E-powered 780 Ti, I didn't notice and I turned it on, and that dead dual end FET burned an even bigger hole into the PCB. On the 290X I did notice, but that one had a giant short circuit and I had to dig a hole through the PCB anyway. This one got lucky because all the dual end FETs are still okay. So this one was a rather easy repair. I actually kinda expected to at least one phase to be completely dead. And I kept the components I pulled off of the other card when I e-powered it, kind of expecting that I would have to replace at least one dual end FET here, but as it turns out, they're actually completely fine. So I got really lucky with this repair. And also so if you're wondering why there isn't like a full-on proper repair video, is I knew from the beginning what was wrong with this card, and I knew from the beginning that there wasn't any PCB burn damage. Because the eBay seller that I got this card from, oh, and I just noticed I'm screwing the heatsink on wrong. One of the holes is offset. Yeah, so the eBay seller had pretty good pictures of the PCB, like of the burnt capacitors, and I was able to see, oh, okay, so this is another one of these where the VCore VRM went short circuit, and there isn't any burn damage in the PCB. So this one is probably repairable by just pulling the dead components and replacing them. All the dead components turned out to be 12-volt input filtering capacitors, so I don't even see the need to replace them, because there is so much redundancy in the 12-volt input filter that it just couldn't be needed. You should see what 6900 XTs use as their input filter. It's like basically this. Like only these 4 capacitors. That's like, as far as I know, that's like all that a 1600 XT has, and this card is like all of that, and then the remaining multi-layer ceramics too. So the 12-volt input filtering will be fine, especially because this also should pull less power than a 1600 XT. So yeah, so this was a rather easy, pretty lucky repair. So I now have another working 780 Ti Matrix Platinum. And this one also seems to be better at overclocking than the e-powered one, actually. It has better memory and a slightly better core. It just clocks better on both memory and core than the e-powered one. Admittedly, the e-powered one is not finished yet, so there is more improvement to be had, but I'm kind of happy that I have a platinum now, because I've had a non-platinum matrix before, and well, that one just kind of had a bad core because the platinums got all the good cores. So yeah, I'm kind of happy that I have a working platinum now that doesn't have an e-power, because like e-powers are nice and pretty cool, but they are kind of hard to work with, especially because I can't use the stock heatsink anymore, or any air heatsink for that matter. Like e-powered cards are usually confined to water cooling only. So yeah, and also I can run SLI platinums now, so that is cool. And yeah, that should be it for the video. It was a rather simple repair, just pull burnt capacitors. It might not even have been necessary, like, because there was never a short circuit. It seems to have like burned itself out before I even got the card. But I would still recommend pulling burnt components off the card. You really shouldn't risk turning that on, especially after the other card burned a hole into the PCB from a dead dual end FET after I tried to turn it on. So yeah. Anyway, so thank you all for watching, hope you enjoyed, and until next time, goodbye.